This is Bumping Into, where we have interesting conversations with people from all walks of life.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Bumping Into. I am Francis Populin, and for this episode we embark on a thought-provoking and somewhat alarming journey to discuss a matter of great significance, a proposed Australian law that aims to restrict free speech and define the truth as it be seen by a government agency. The right to free speech has been a pillar of democratic societies, providing individuals with the freedom to express their thoughts, ideas and opinions. But as the world's evolving, so do the challenges that have come with this freedom. Now, Australia is finding itself at a crossroads, navigating the delicate balance between safeguarding democratic values and addressing concerns around things like harmful speech and misinformation. While some angles of the media might fail to tell you all you need to know, and others like to deliver it wrapped in fear and fire, the truth is that going down a rabbit hole of telling people what can and can't be said is very dangerous. You could argue that it's more dangerous than letting things being said and allowing people to make up their own minds, or even choose to be offended or not offended by it. This year, the Australian government announced its intention to bring in a new bill that would allow the Australian Communications and Media Authority to define what is misinformation and disinformation, and find both platform and individual that failed to remove or alter that information. I have had several people email me over the last few months asking for an episode on this that would provide a non-biased summary view on what this bill would mean. Once I started looking into it, I was horrified to see what this bill has in mind. Don't be fooled by the lack of attention that it's not receiving from mainstream media and think that it might not be that big of a deal, because it is. The reason you won't hear too much from mainstream channels is because that legacy and accredited government media agencies are totally excluded from it. So this means they can define the truth and the information as they see it without any fear or question. This bill threatens to take away the likes of independent research and will make the work of independent journalists extremely complex and high risk. It's very easy to have something dismissed once someone calls it a conspiracy theory. That term now is almost used as a derogatory implication by mainstream media. But make no mistake, while it might have all the hallmarks of a dystopian conspiracy theory, this bill is extremely worrying, and it's clear on its intentions and its proposed powers. Those that have been dressing it in fear and fire are correct. Regardless of your brand of politics, you need to take attention to what this bill is about. You see, part of the problem in Australia is we don't have anything in our constitution that covers the right to free speech. So this means if a government of the day wants to pass a bill or a law that gives them the right to control the information you see and hear, they will then have the ability to do that. It's that simple. This bill will simply allow government to control platforms through fear or fines based on what it believes to be the truth and misinformation, and it itself is excluded. This really is that dystopian, and it is that clear in its intended powers. On this episode, I'm joined by IP attorney Chris Baxter, whose Twitter account went viral after he read the bill and sent out several tweets explaining his disbelief in just how authoritarian and overreaching this bill actually is. We'll explore the driving forces behind the proposed law, the key arguments made by both people that I guess would stand to support and benefit, and its critics, the potential implications that it may also have on Australian society. So get ready to explore the nuances of this proposed law and the balance of freedom of expression, independent journalistic research, and the choice of information that now comes under the greatest threat in modern history. Remember that you can head to bumpinginto.com.au, find the episode page to find out more information, some of the links that we're going to speak about. Just remember, no matter what, stay curious, and let's go straight into my conversation with Chris Baxter. Chris, how you going?
How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. How are you going?
Really well. I've basically never been involved in politics in my life, but for the first time last night, I held a political action group meeting.
Oh, really? How'd it go?
Yeah, it was surprisingly good. I mean, didn't know what to expect, but
Yeah.
basically a bunch of really altruistically minded people from different backgrounds who are concerned about this misinformation, disinformation bill got together and we had a good chat.
Wow. And was the consensus the same? Everyone's got fears and everyone can see we're going down a wrong path?
Remarkably, yes is the short answer. I think one thing that kind of happens these days because different groups of media are so we call in their own sort of echo chambers.
Yeah.
You tend to wonder if you're the only one who thinks a certain way.
Yeah, very much. It's a good observation. It's very true for a lot of people, especially people that like to question and don't pick a side based on a brand.
Right, right. And I think that, sort of was particularly an issue during the COVID period where everyone was so isolated and everyone had their own thoughts, but there was only so much that was acceptable to say.
Yeah, yep. No.
So I was really surprised about the concerns the group voiced in that it wasn't just limited to this misinformation bill. We all see this misinformation bill as one part of a broader situation of, well, in one sense, the wall's closing in.
Yeah.
But what does that actually mean? Well, it's the government chipping away at civil liberties.
Yeah, yep. It's probably well timed that you've done this too, because what I wanted to try and do with yourself is basically, because you even touched on the media thing too, which I've got an example that I wanted to talk about, is that there is this huge perception of views or the way that they project that news can be, it's so two sides. There's nothing in the middle anymore. It's not, here's the information, you make up your own mind. It's very much coming across with like if you're cooking something, the spice is opinion, and they're throwing in a bunch of it. And what I wanted to do is without belonging to either of those brands of politics, is encapsulate what it is this bill means in its core sense, and then throw at you a couple of scenarios that I have thought of how they would come out in the wash.
It's also worth saying, and I just say this because it's let's say a common point of confusion. I'm a patent attorney. I'm not a lawyer. What that means is my background's in engineering, actually aeronautical engineering out of all things, and I've done a master's degree in intellectual property law. But I'm not a solicitor. So all sort of opinions on the bill, are essentially sort of a skilled layman's perspective.
Which is perfect, which is exactly what I want, because I don't want it to get lost in the complexities. I want it to be that someone can understand a scenario as a common person would, but with a high level understanding. So that's perfect. If we go into the essence of it is, we've got January 2023, the Minister for Communications announced that the government would look at introducing new laws to provide the Australian Communications and Media Authority with advanced powers to combat what it sees as misinformation and disinformation. So basically the government saying to its offshoot, we want to give you more power to go out there and squash what, and this is one sticky point, someone believes to be a point of misinformation. Now, that means that they would be able to make platforms remove anything that they believe to be misinformation. Failure to do that, they can issue a fine to that platform, 5% of their annual global turnover, or an individual up to $500,000. And so essentially they're saying that if Platform X is seen to be hosting something that someone has put on there and they don't remove it, they can get a fine. but essentially they'll be frantically looking to remove things to avoid the fine. So anything that might even be grey, I mean, if it's grey, it doesn't suit the individual, it suits the government or whoever wants to come after you with something. So if it's a grey area, it's gone, essentially. This is how I sort of saw it, that bill. There's a whole bunch of issues and questions that it raises, and some of them being, well, who decides misinformation? Who decides what that is, which is a huge one. And ultimately, the government can put whatever sticker they want on it and whatever color logo they want. But ultimately, the government decides. They appoint who is on the board, and they're going to decide what it may be.
Right.
Now, so with that, what I wanted to do is tell me if I'm looking at this wrong, but is this not, the government can't control the internet, but the government can control the platform via the use of fear and fines?
Yeah, and you might say, well, why do they want to do that? Well, what is said on the platforms is a proxy for free speech.
Yep, that's right.
It's the and I'm far from the first person to have said this, but it's the modern public square.
Exactly
and
right.
You can control the venue where speech occurs. You can control speech.
100%.
And so what is really concerning here is, why does government want to control speech?
Well, that's my next thing on that is, tell me if you see this wrong. I see this as mandating the truth as they see it.
Well, that's sort of what we're concerned about, sort of where this could lead.
Yeah.
But in the short term, specifically, what this bill allows for is requiring digital platforms to provide evidence of misinformation or disinformation that occurs on their platforms, and to detail the measures that the platforms implemented to prevent or respond to the misinformation or disinformation, and even on the prevalence of information and even to report on the prevalence of information that doesn't strictly meet its fairly broad definitions of what could be misinformation or disinformation, but is nonetheless false, misleading, or deceptive. So the requirement applies to web platforms all around the world. Any web platform that has one Australian user, or could be viewed by Australians. Immediately we think of Facebook and Twitter and maybe the new Threads and Instagram and so forth. But there's tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of community-based web forums, WhatsApp groups of...
Exactly. Well, that was my next thing, is one of the things of consideration is the scope of the private message exemption. So that means if you, me, and a couple of other guys throw a message around.
Yes.
Wow.
At what point does that interactive media, which it is it deemed a sort of a public conversation rather than private messaging? That's very unclear. My view is that where a group couldn't demonstratively show that that it was a private messaging situation between people who all knew each other, then you've probably moved from sort of private to public. And let's face it, that's the case with most WhatsApp groups of more than maybe 10 people. You just don't know everyone. So very, 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 and this also includes web platforms that from overseas that have Australian visitors. So how does that work, right? I mean, imagine, I don't know, if the Danish government or the American government or the Indonesian government had some sort of reciprocal requirement of Australian web forums. It very quickly becomes completely unmanageable.
Well, you wouldn't want to play in that space. Risk versus reward. You'd pull out. It's as simple as that. And what what is interesting, and you listen to I can see how one side of the media can broadcast this as fear and fire, but it really is. It's almost comical that when you look at the list of, okay, who's excluded? Well, exclusions are the government itself are totally excluded. Any professional...
Not surprising, huh? Not surprising.
Any professional or legacy news outlets, such as the ABC, 1097, and then you've got any accredited government departments or affiliates. So amongst itself is...
Educational institutions and so forth.
Educational as well, yep. So they are excluded 100% from it. So, I mean, I really try to not be on the fire and fear side of media at all. But when you read this and you read what they're coming after, it's hard for someone that sits on the fence to not be extremely worried. I think everyone should be extremely worried, except the people making the law.
Yes, and those who stand to benefit from the bill if it's passed into legislation. And unfortunately, that includes the mainstream media. Yeah. So there is an incentive here that's important to be aware of for the media not to make a big fuss about this bill.
Yeah, keep it under the carpet, push it through nice and quiet.
Because if it goes through, they gain prima facie trustworthiness and a prima facie, what can we say, ability to determine truth. And for the others, though, the onus is on them to show their trustworthiness, to have an opinion and share it on a digital platform. See, what this is doing, Francis, is it's creating two classes of citizen. Those whom the government deems trustworthy to participate in public forums without being monitored and reported on, and those whom the government deems cannot be trusted. You don't have to be a civil liberties advocate to see how unjust and inequitable this sort of approach is. We all know, the litany of so-called conspiracy theories that have occurred over the last few years. I won't name them all because they're public knowledge, but you've got the laptop, you've got lab leak, you've got 3 years of something collusion, you've got various rules about what should and shouldn't be done in the presence of a particular virus.
Yep.
It's sort of, we all know them, and it just goes to show that you never want to give one party a monopoly on the truth.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, people should be smart enough to make their own mind up and the freedom to do it.
Totally.
Yeah. And I was actually going to quiz you on this. I mean, this may be a totally stupid idea, but if the government is so intent on putting its authority on the truth and making sure that people understand what it believes is the truth, make up your own certification. We put the kangaroo on Australian-made products. Come up with your own sticker and say that this product is officially viewed as the truth by the government. And if people feel comfortable in it, well, there it is. It's a little logo that says that complies with what the government endorses. Problem solved. You haven't had to go in and destroy freedom of speech or free rights. You've created your own way around it.
Maybe that's an idea. Francis, I haven't heard that one, but that makes a lot of sense to me.
To me, it makes a lot of sense. I thought that would be the first thing that I would do if I was in any form of industry body looking to provide an accreditation on what we believe to be. Not squash and remove everything, but go about the way of promoting what we believe and offer it out there as a certified piece of government truth. Take it or leave it.
So far as those matters, concern the general sort of ambit and responsibilities of government, which shouldn't be everything. I see no issue with the government taking positions, on some of these things. It should avoid taking positions on things that it really doesn't need to. But I think that's I don't think that's a bad idea necessarily. It would allow them to express a view without imposing it on everyone else.
Exactly. And look, there's always going to be a portion that see force or mandates or whatever terminology you want to use as the removal of trust, not the creation of it. So would you not try the least path of resistance first, offer that before you go using mandated trust and enforcements and fines? I don't know. Maybe I'm looking at it too simplistically, but to me, that seems like the first path that you would take, and you're not infringing on anyone's rights. You're providing a true to the sense of a free democracy.
Yeah, I think they need to. I think they need to take a few steps back, and remember, from 2,500 years ago, why the Greeks coined this term parrhesia. Now, I'm not 100% certain I'm saying that right, but it's basically what it means is candid speech where people are entitled to, and with an assumption of free speech, people entitled to share their opinions and speak candidly about things with a view to the common good from their own perspective. And this is a beautiful thing, because if we can value parrhesia, then we give society the opportunity to put all views on the table and to work through those views using dialectic, logic, debate, argument, all these things that are the bedrock of Western and some other civilizations, and you use those tools to its full advantage. How the thing that, since reading about this Mistis bill late June when I was on a family holiday, and I'll tell you the story about that a little bit later, but the one question I cannot answer for myself is, how is it that a government can put such a tyrannical bill before its people? How is it that in 2,500 years we've forgotten the value of discussing complex, sometimes difficult, sometimes offensive ideas with each other to try and sense make our way towards what may or may not be true?
Yeah. It's incredible. I know it's sometimes and for a lot of people, they hold the people in government as high regard. They're intelligent. They've been elected. They're supposed to be well educated, well experienced. I mean, these are all the things you wish for that would appear in a government. And then you just scratch your head at some of these decisions as lacking pure grassroots common sense, and then you don't want to go down the whole, is there an agenda? Is there someone to gain benefit? You really don't like going down those holes, but when you can't tick any other box as to the logic, that's where people start drifting towards.
Yeah. It's sort of again, like just looking at the real fundamentals of what is being proposed here, and these sort of two classes of people that it effectively would create. The question needs to be asked: what is the group level psychological effects on a large portion of society who are effectively being disempowered by this bill? And when I say disempowered, I mean, I say how they're disempowered. Well, it's kind of obvious on the face of it, but how do you articulate it? And well, I've been thinking about it, and I think the issue is it presupposes fault. The bill presupposes fault by an individual or a group in their ability to sense make. And the big, I'd say, I'm not quite sure whether it's a philosophy or sometimes something a little bit more of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. The big idea there is that everyone, in theory, if you take the words at face value, that everyone should be included in the process. And surely there's no more important process to include everyone in sense making.
Yeah. Well, tell me, the research I've done on this is it seems that the biggest reason or opportunity that this can come in is because that we are one of the only democratic countries that doesn't have the right to free speech in our constitution. So where this would be extremely, if not impossible, to pass in some other countries, we're here because that's not written in our constitution. It really is the government can come in and make a 3 a.m. decision like they've done before, and you wake up the next morning and this has happened.
Yeah, it's interesting because whilst, as you say, we don't have that baked into our constitution, we do have, through common law, a series of precedents that would effectively give us freedom of political communication. But what you see in this bill, the decision is given to ACMA as to whether certain actions, or to decide on to what extent this impinges on our freedom of political communication. And that decision shouldn't be given to ACMA. That decision, should be a democratic.
Let's say, for example, that this gets through and the government elects a board or a committee. No doubt it's going to be made up of public servants and politicians and judges, or big industry, lucrative industry, are all going to be in this melting pot. Now, if you've got a bunch of judges in there and all the rest of it, it would be a brave judge who's not in that board to side against them on any decision. I know there's meant to be the separation of powers. I understand the theory behind it. It's a beautiful theory. But if we bring it back to what could potentially happen, it is a brave person who would be willing to go against where their peers are engaged in a board that has made a decision, and almost an impossible feat.
Yeah, I agree. It's just peer pressure, right?
Yeah, exactly right.
We saw that well and truly work itself out during the COVID period with what would be ordinarily perfectly lovely and reasonable people sort of taking authoritarian positions on whether people should lose their jobs and so forth.
Yeah. Well, if we talk about peer pressure and the fear. So allegedly, Canada has passed the Bill C-11. Now, I've only done some ground level research on this, but since it's a similar bill, since that's been passed, Meta has now blocked any other news source other than the endorsed legacy platforms. So if you run any sort of independent media, any independent researching, if you're an independent journalist, they're not going to let you go on there for fear of being fined. So that platform becomes a mouthpiece for the bill and who it was created to benefit. That's all it's done. And it's basically silenced anything that's independent or non-government endorsed, which is incredible to think that has happened, but that has happened. We're not talking about some movie. We're talking about what's happening on the other side of the world at the moment. And it's gone through largely unspoken.
Well, that's what I'm really, what I'm really concerned about here is this bill clearly appears to be a stepping stone on a path somewhere or one station on the track. And I'm not smart enough to have figured out what the subsequent stations are going to be, but I think it's a pretty smart idea, as you've just done, to look at what's happened and happening in other countries. One's just got to ask the fundamental question. So you're collecting these millions and millions of data points of things Australians have said on digital platforms, you're categorizing it according to your own perspectives and values, or, those of a body put together by ACMA, as either, I don't know, reasonable misinformation or disinformation, or at least collecting the misinformation, disinformation. And what for? What for?
Yeah.
What for? You're going to have huge amounts of data within years. What for? I don't think you have to be a conspiracy theorist. All this data is being collected for something more than just saving it.
Yeah.
And something more than, just trying to sort of apply subtle pressures to digital platforms. At some point, the pressure, I believe, is going to move from being applied to the digital platforms and the threats that this bill makes to digital platforms, and there are a number of them, to threats to individuals.
Yeah.
And at the moment, the most tangible threat to the individual is to be hauled in front of the ACMA board under Section 19 and have to give an account of some comments or information about a friend or a family member who has said something that the government believes will or could cause or could contribute to serious harm according to their very broad definition.
Yeah.
And that, that's the stuff of the Soviet Union, not of a country like Australia.
And what plays on my mind is you've got people in power at the moment that are ready to push the go button on this decision. And it's almost like they haven't thought, well, hang on, I'm going to have kids, they're going to have kids. What is the legacy this will leave behind? Because those kids and their kids most likely aren't going to benefit from this. This is benefiting those in power at the present.
I think you're right in your observation before that there's a huge amount of peer pressure playing itself out here. And I don't confess to understand the mechanics of that. But, we all see the posts that on a daily basis by various international bodies around sort of hate speech, misinformation, disinformation, and it's a somewhat propagandistic in its nature, in that there's not posts on the other side coming from these large global organizations about the importance of free speech, the importance of tolerance and diversity of thought, and say something about hate speech, sure, and we say something about not everything we hear will be true.
Yeah.
Call it misinformation.
Yeah.
But
well, you've got to tell me what I'm looking at. What am I voting for? Don't tell me how to vote, because then I'm going to be suspicious.
Exactly. And look, there's some sort of pernicious aspects of this bill that only really come out when certain scenarios are worked through. I know you have a couple to throw at me.
Yeah.
Would you like me to lead the way with one?
Yeah.
I'm a Christian, but there are people of all faiths in Australia. There's Muslims, there's Jews, there's Indigenous people that have aspects of faith. And traditional knowledge, and these beliefs can be easily reduced by by government that sort of presupposes, say, an atheistic position as truth. Can our faith positions, and a lot of Australians have faiths, I don't know what percentage, but it'd be more than 50% have, would be my guess, have some sort of faith position.
Yeah.
These can be easily reduced by a government that presupposes an atheistic worldview as misinformation. And so when you have a Christian with a, say, biblical worldview, or a Muslim with a worldview that is is highly influenced by the Quran, or a Buddhist whose views are highly influenced by the teachings of Buddha, that want to talk in a public forum, and maybe they want to share something about their faith, or maybe their faith gives them a certain perspective on a public issue. I mean, we want to be able to share our perspectives from our heart. And if there's no reason to think why in the future, and I don't know what station number, if we're at station A, I don't know if that is at station C or at station F. But there's no reason to think that a government would not reduce our faith perspectives to misinformation or even disinformation in the future.
Well, it gives them that power. They can twist and turn and say, we wouldn't do that. And we've all heard that before. The GST was we wouldn't. It's a politics. Whatever they say doesn't mean anything. The proof is in the text, and the text gives them that ability.
Yeah, and part of that is because so many of the definitions are terribly defined, very loosely defined. And
because
we all
grey
know
is their friend. Grey is always a government's friend. It's their best friend.
Yeah. It doesn't matter which. It doesn't matter if it's Labor.
No, it doesn't. No, that's exactly right. And I was going to mention that as people tend to jump on the opposite team. It's like we don't like the one that we're with, so we look to the other as the savior. And that's dangerous in itself, because the other was in last time, and they didn't necessarily change the world for the better either. And they had opportunity. So it's not pick your brand, and one is the savior and one is the not, but you have to have your eyes on both of them. They're both magicians, and you've got to be watching the hand that they're not flashing in front of you.
So true. Yeah. I mean, look, every, some people might dispute me on this, but I think every, political party, and every, if you go to the individual level, every individual has something to contribute to the public forum in terms of their perspectives and views, and support of different views and thoughts based on their life experience. And it just shouldn't be cancelled out. No,
I totally agree. So let me throw at you a couple of these. I've got a couple that I want to see what your thoughts would be on. And we'll start with, one is the concern, I suppose, around organizations. So if we use an example, let's just say, I mean, I've done a podcast with an organization that has concerns on mobile phone use, high-level mobile phone use, and they've got a body of evidence to suggest that it may be more dangerous than we're being told, and it's a growing body of evidence, and it's being done by independent scientists, accredited, not John in the backyard playing around with a multimeter. We're talking about scientists that share a view that is against what the government is saying. There's nothing to see here. Now, that organization, under this new bill, potentially will either have to fold or run the risk of fines, because they're talking about sharing and presenting information that at this point in time the government's deeming misinformation.
Well, let's look at the bill and see how that plays out. I'll do my best here. Okay. So on page 6 of the bill, there's a definition for harm, and under point D, it says harm to the health of Australians. And under point F, it says economic or financial harm to Australians. So
you've just answered that. I see where you're going there, because that's exactly right. That would be an economic disadvantage to someone in Australia, should that information be true.
Well, say the relevant information was information about a negative effect that 5G could have. This is just a hypothetical example pulled out of my hat. I don't know anything about it myself. It's written down there. It's put on a digital platform. If it came to be that from such, and the government would construe it this way, that this could contribute to a situation of serious harm to the economic, the economy of Australia, its ability to compete economically with other countries, if Australians came to the view that we shouldn't use 5G anymore because it's a superior internet technology, much greater bandwidth and speeds, and so forth. So the problem with this bill is that it leaves so much open. And whilst some of these possibilities seem unlikely,
they exist.
It's, for the frog that's being slowly boiled in the pot, he's like, I'm never going to be boiled. The bath's just warming up. It's only...
they're looking after me. They're making me comfortable.
Yeah. So, it's part of the Australian way to have some cynicism and, a little bit of healthy disrespect for the government. And that's what helps us keep them honest. Yeah. And it's part of the democratic system. It's great to look at scenarios like this because it really tests what's possible.
Yeah. No, you're right. Another one I've got. So something is presented as a class action. So they've got supporting evidence from 10,000 studies in their favour, showing in their favour. Would it be thrown out of court as being frivolous by the judge based on that it's at the time deemed misinformation?
Yeah, interesting. Well, okay, so you got a couple of things going on here. One is a court case against presumably a party other than ACMA. Well, I think we all know what an example of this could potentially look like. And then you got the situation of the evidence or the argument of the plaintiff being presented by ACMA and the digital platforms reporting to ACMA as misinformation, and to what extent might that play into the natural justice and the course of justice seeing its way through the normal course without political interference.
Yep, and the evidence being valid.
Yeah,
because you can very easily squash anything if at the time it's not deemed to be certified by the government as true.
Well, I think in a court situation, you're going to have like expert evidence brought to the table and that type of thing. So it may not be persuasive. Designation as misinformation or disinformation may not be persuasive, but just the question is to what extent is that going to play into a judge's
that's right. And who does it protect? We can keep something that way for 50 years until it's been long enough to not impact anyone that made a decision 50 years ago, and then say, okay, now we could have that same case and have a different outcome. So that's an interesting variable of events.
Scenario. Yeah, it's a good question to ask, sort of how the politics might play into.
And I'll give you another one, my second last one. So I'll give you a back end story to this. So it was actually an Australian scientist in 1901, Dr. Gibson, who started drawing lines of conclusion that there was issues with lead in paint and health effects. He was the first scientist in the world to officially register this. And in 1901, he basically discovered that there was a link. In 1904, he published a paper showing his findings and his concerns. So first thing is, 1904, he's published something. If this law was in place already, we've got that probably wouldn't have happened out of fear, or he would have copped himself a fine, or the platforms available to him, which would have been the post office and the telegram machine, would have been like, we refuse to send that because we're going to get a fine if we do. Or the publisher would have refused to print it.
Yeah, I think you're mostly right. I think, yes, very much there would be a sense of intimidation. Secondly, yes, digital platforms might, the equivalent of the digital platform might take it down, to avoid fines and so forth.
So then what we've got...
He wouldn't have been fined directly.
Directly, though. Okay. So 1904, he's published his paper showing his findings. In 1920, so we're now talking almost 20 years later, so he's been continually researching this. In 1920, he had a significant body of evidence to show there was an issue here with paint, with lead paint and the health effects. He took that to the League of Nations at the time. The report was, the findings are in stark contrast to that of the industry-backed research, and it was dismissed. Now,
yeah. Sorry.
It gets better than that. So,
okay.
1920, after 20 years of research, it's been dismissed. Your view is different to the League of Nations at the time. We're dismissing it, which is okay. That's fine. We all knew, we've seen this with smoking. We've seen it with various other chemicals and medicines that have come over time and that were deemed safe, and 20, 60, 50 years later, they've changed their voice on, which is fine. So we're up to 1920. They've said, no, your evidence is in stark contrast to the official evidence, and it was dismissed. 1970, had he have lived to be 100 years old, he would have seen the official removal of lead from paint, because now the industry deemed it to be a health risk. 100 years old, had he have lived. That's from 1901 to 1970. That's how long it took. As sad as that is, it took that long, and as many children were impacted and birth defects occurred. It would be sadder to think, and tell me if I'm wrong, that would not happen if this bill is in place. If he didn't have friends in high power, if he wasn't part of a government-backed research facility or agency, this would never be seen, never be brought to light.
And I'll tell you why. Because society comes to a view on truth, what's true, what's false, over time, through incremental education, through incremental dialectic and debate. It's always a process of knowledge, and forming a view on something is always a process of receiving information in little bits over time.
Yep.
And all those inputs go into the great neural network that is our brain, and the neurons start to connect differently, and our perspective starts to change. In the situation where content is effectively censored by the government via the digital proxy, you're left in these situations where for something to be believable, you have to go from, for an idea that is someone is trying to bring into the public consciousness as something that's true, you have to go from 0 to 100% straight away. There's been no building up of the argument, building up the information over time, because it's been censored. And so it's much harder to take that jump to this very foreign thing being true than if the issue was aired and educated on over time.
And then my last example, which is a bit comical. We've got, let's just say in Australia, we've got the government-driven endorsed media outlet, which is on free to air, and then people can choose to pay to watch the other more right-wing skewed outfit. If we go back over the last 10 years, and let's just say you do an experiment, and I listened to someone actually mention this in a podcast, and they said, I used to come home and at 6 o'clock I would watch the free-to-air news provider, and then I would flick over to the other one on pay TV, and everything that they said on that one was the exact opposite on this one. And one was saying that Trump is this and Trump is that, and the other one was saying that Trump is a hero and Trump is this. Now, in tomorrow's world, when this bill gets passed, how does the other news provider survive? They're going to be copping a fine every night.
Well, that is a potential issue, but even the initial issue is how those financial situation, the comparative financial situation of those two news outlets, because you've got the one news outlet that that's not burdened with this huge overhead of sorting through all of its information, categorizing information, dealing with ACMA, reporting to ACMA, having to pay fines when it gets it wrong. And then you've got every the government accredited, accredited's not quite, the government acceptable news content providers who don't have any of that overhead. So you've
well, they get given information and just they become a messaging service. They are a media messenger.
And you can also imagine, so that's the first point, is just sort of is an asymmetry in obligation on the two news outlets. So one has a commercial advantage over the other. Secondly, you can be sure that the government will be publishing misinformation, disinformation reports about what the particular news outlets that are failing to meet certain benchmarks for misinformation or disinformation, and that will have a huge negative reputational effect on the alternative news content providers. So you've got it's kind of not just the threat of fines, it's the whole sort of commercial scenario around it as well.
And tell me, if this gets through, which I mean, it seems in some capacity it will, it doesn't another elected government have the ability to say, all right, on day one, that goes away. Let's reinstate trust by freedom of speech and possibly certification of what we deem as officially recognized information, but not taking everyone's ability for critical thinking away. Can a government come in on day one of a new election and do that?
I'm not being a political guy, being a business person. I'm not 100% sure, to be honest, how that would need to be done.
But we would hope that door does stay open. I mean, not to sing the praises of the opposition, but
it's not going to be locked in. We're not talking about legislation being locked in sort of constitutionally or something here. Not being put in the Constitution, unlike another particular political campaign at the moment. The Voice.
Yeah, which is virtually you can't undo once it's done.
Much more difficult to.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no doubt that it could be undone by a sensibly minded political party, but I'm concerned, looking at the large parties in Australia, that neither of them seem like to be grounded in values that would cause them to take that action. I've always thought the Liberal Party might have and stand on some of those classical liberal values, but I don't know anymore.
No, I agree. I've had the same thought, and I mean, it seems that hope lies in the independent. The problem is there isn't enough of them.
Yeah, I think so, and they need to sort of. There isn't enough of them, and they don't work together.
Yes, that's right, which ends up then going against, yeah, I know. It's unfortunate because, if you look at the way it should work, it should be a body of independents and they all then can agree on what is best, not one big brand with someone at the top fearful of losing their job or gaining something if they side a particular way.
I think the hope here somehow, and when I put on my sort of just use my logical mind, I don't. It seems hard to imagine, but the hope is that through talking about this bill enough and spreading the news, that sensibly minded Australians, of which most Australians are, will start to speak their mind about this bill, and politicians will listen.
Yeah.
And to that end, I formed a political action group to publish information about this bill. There's 10 of us. We met for the first time last night, and we're putting a website together which will have detailed information about the bill, numerous examples of how, if it gets accepted in its current form, it will play out. Trying hard to connect with politicians and MPs to talk to them about the dangers of this bill.
That's, I think, the best thing that we can hope for, and hope that there's more middle of the road politicians that can just see common sense and see the future not as the moment they live in, but for what they're going to leave behind for their kids and onwards and others.
And have some trust.
Yeah,
and have some trust in ordinary people to sense make without having to be, to have government breathing down their neck and, recording everything they're saying, categorizing what they're saying. I mean, it's just, it's tyrannical. And
yeah. And it is.
We don't need that. What have Australians done to ever indicate that they're people who need to be controlled like this?
Yeah. And look, for the most part, you could argue that we're a people that if you leave us alone, we'll leave you alone. Just let us go about our lives. We pay enough tax for those high and mighty to live the high life, and most people don't question things. So don't you're not going to gain more trust and respect by mandating the truth as you see it. It's not going to be the whole, if you live under my roof, this is the rules. That's not going to help anyone, not today, tomorrow.
I totally agree. I mean, it's a matter of, respect your, respect Australians, and Australians might show a little bit more respect for government.
Chris, well, once you get that website up, make sure you share the details with me, because I will be sure to have a page on my page for this podcast, which will have that website on it. So
fantastic.
If people want to go digging more and find out more, it's going to be there for them to find.
Brilliant. I'll do that as soon as it's up, and thank you for your support.
Thanks for making it through to the end of the show. If you wanted to find out more about this episode, head to bumpinginto.com.au. Don't forget the .au, and find the episode page. There'll be some links and some more info about the guest and all of the topics and items that we spoke about. Feel free to have a look around and check out any other episodes while you're there. And if you think that someone else would enjoy what you have just listened to, please do feel free to hit the share button. Thank you again for having us in your ear space. I truly appreciate it, and I hope to catch you on the next one.